Right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to councillors. As we head into this workshop, welcome to members of the public in the chamber, maybe one or two candidates amongst you. So welcome to you all. Today's an opportunity just to catch up on the latest. We're going to be having these weekly workshops to make sure we stay on top of preparations for the water services delivery plan that we need to make. So staff have been working frantically in the background, getting a lot of information together, and so appreciate what you are doing, and just acknowledge that work. So thank you very much for that. We'll hand straight over to Mr. Palmley.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. And yeah, I'd like to emphasise that point. Staff are working frantically in the background to develop a water services delivery plan that complies with the government's requirements. I know there's lots of views on this from elected members, and emails are pinging about. So I just want to say that where we're at the moment, we're really focused on those deadlines. So if we're not responding directly to the emails, we're trying to respond to the things that are raised in those emails into the workshops, so that everyone gets a view on that. Everyone is shared that information, including in public as well, and what the response is to that. So it's really important that we get a consolidated view from the councillors about that to help shape this plan, rather than just responding to one or two views that might be expressed. Yes, if we don't get back to you straight away, that's the reason why. We are flat out trying to get this done. So we're going to hand over to Amanda in a second, who's going to give an update on how things are looking since the workshop last week, and how we've responded to what was discussed at the workshop and other things that have come out since. And then Josh is going to talk a little bit about the programme, with a view to what we come out with today, going into what will be a very first rough cut draft water services delivery plan to submit to the DIA for their feedback. In discussions with the DIA, they want to help us, so they're interested in what that looks like, and they've committed to respond to us within a week, so that we can then feed that back to councillors to what their advice might be, where areas of concern might be that we need to respond to. So with that, if you're happy, we'll hand over to Amanda to take us through the slide pack updating on last week's discussions.
Okay, so just to confirm that the slides that are in the pack are the same, exactly same materials that I've just handed out in hard copy. And we'll follow through them on the screen for people watching. So I just thought it would be quite good to recap where we left off at the meeting this time last week. So we started with the long-term plan budgets that were approved on the 30th of June. We added the Three Waters figures back in from 1 July 2027. The CapEx listing that was approved as part of the long-term plan was also added back in from 1 July 2027. It was the CapEx that we'd applied that 15 mil cap. And then we also added around $1 million per annum of additional costs of having Three Waters as a separate ring fence unit, recognising that it could no longer be just business as usual approach under the new regulations. So that resulted in quite significant deficits. You want to go to page 2, and from 27 and beyond. So to adjust for that, we needed to increase revenue, and that's the resulting break-even point that we saw last week. Balanced budget was pretty close. Debt, we noted, with the assuming we will receive a credit rating from the 28 financial year onwards, our debt cap can be increased to 280%, up from the 175% that it is currently. So we noted that debt was increasing basically in line with our required capital projects spend. And so it was getting really high, really close to the cap in 2034. And rates affordability can be achieved in the longer term, but there was that significant increase in the 2028 financial year to reset our revenue in line with our operating costs. So it was fully covering our operating costs. So that is where we left last week. The following page outlines the key messages, takeaways and things that we discussed quite in depth at the last workshop. So our overall purpose is to achieve sustainable financial forecasts with Three Waters. Question. Yep.
The process of getting the credit rating that they propose, that's a 3-year process.
No, it wouldn't be a 3-year process. We would look to do it straight away, but I just applied it from that first year where we needed it. Worst case scenario, it'll be in place before the 20 financial year. So yeah, potentially in 26, worst case 27. Any other questions at the moment? Yeah, so the key messages, we were just trying to find financially sustainable forecasts to deliver an in-house business unit, ring fenced from our other departments, noting that business as usual, our Three Waters department was loss making historically. And then we talked about the extra costs of running a ring fence business unit. We included the bare minimum that we could possibly need. We talked about obtaining the credit rating, had a bit of a discussion about that, looking to breach the debt cap because that increasing capital expenditure trend was going beyond year 9 of the long-term plan. And so just trying to get an understanding of what level council wanted to go to. We had a big discussion on the 15 mil cap on Three Waters projects, recognising that this is unlikely to be accepted. There is significant work required over the next 10 years, and we've superficially applied that 15 mil cap. In the original budgets that we discussed last year, the projects listings were almost double that each year. Yeah, and just noting that there was limited opportunity for other capital projects across council, given that we're so close to our debt cap. There is nothing built into the budgets for emergency work or unforeseen events or when assets don't last their theoretical useful life. We had a big look at the 25% rates increase in 28. And yeah, there'll be discussion about how we smooth that or what that looks like going forward and how that's spread across the district. And funding for depreciation was a key area, and yeah, what the impacts that would have. So today I have taken advice from last week and included funding for Three Waters depreciation from 1 July 27. So we aren't funding waters depreciation in the 26 or 27 financial years, but from 1 July 27, we start applying it to 100% again. I've also pulled forward the $8 million water metering project at council's request from last week. So that was in 2034. I've included that in the 28 and 29 year, spread it over 2 years at 4 million each year. And later in this pack, I've provided longer term debt projections. They're very high level. It's quite hard to predict our long-term 30-year outlook for CapEx projects at this point. And done some high-level assessment on these forecasts today against the DIA metrics. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And towards the end, we'll have more conversation around the level of CapEx in the waters area. So in terms of adding Three Waters depreciation back on, you can see the figures that we had, the rates revenue from last week's workshop, 22nd of July versus today's workshop. So that's just increasing rates revenue to fully fund waters depreciation. So that's applying whole 100% funding. You could potentially fund less than 100%. It doesn't necessarily have to be 100%, but I've just applied the full 100% so you can see the results.
Which slide are you on? Does that correspond to?
Earlier one than that. Yeah, page 5.
Just while we're pausing on that, I don't think it's realistic to expect that we can wait till the 1st of July 27 to reinstate depreciation. every indication is the economic regulator will require us to properly fund the water operation, as soon as they come into being, still as soon as they set up properly their arrangement. So whether they allow any form of transition, we don't know, but I don't think it'll be realistic to look at the 1st of July 27. We need to look at the 1st of July 26 to reinstate that, and that's whether it's in-house or out external. Yeah, that's the indications they're currently giving from the economic regulator.
Noted. I'm happy to take council's direction from that. I was just trying to avoid touching 26 and 27 years because they already had waters included, and yeah, we're just kind of looking for the change from when it was supposedly going to move to a CCO from 1 July 27. But yeah, that's an option to phase it in earlier, and that would prevent that significant rates rise in 28 as well. If it was broken down, smoothed a bit earlier.
Jim.
Yeah, just apropos of the depreciation basis on which this is being derived, putting aside for a moment the possibility that the regulator will deem 100% depreciation or funding for depreciation of water assets as part of the financial sustainability tests that Parliament's imposing, do our calculations regarding depreciation funding in this document conform with our sort of policy approach, which I think is that if a project is loan funded, then no depreciation, the depreciation doesn't kick in for the first 1 or 2 years. So have we applied that formula for this calculation or not? And if we haven't, do you think we should?
No, so this is just applying flat 100% depreciation. So what your accounting depreciation has been rate funded for here. So Councillor Hopkins has noted a previous council decision in the previous long-term plan, the 2031 long-term plan. You decided not to fund depreciation on those assets where you were also borrowing and paying interest. So you don't want to be paying interest on the new assets and putting aside depreciation funding. So it's kind of twice. So yeah, so in terms of this is the full 100%. So you could reduce it by the capital additions each year that are being funded by loans.
Supplementary, if I may, am I right in assuming that even if we did that, it wouldn't be particularly significant? My understanding is that if, let's say we decide to loan fund something, for the first year, no interest charges are made. So there is effectively a zero sum for 12 months. At that point, interest and capital repayments kick in on a graduated basis. So presumably we'd stratify depreciation and loan repayments. So exempting the fact that there's 1 year of low interest charges, would the effective saving of what I've asked about be the interest impost on the second year?
I don't know the figures off my head, but if you think of in terms of the whole Three Waters asset base, the new capitalised assets in the last few years are not a highly significant part of that. Like the whole value. Yeah, I'm just talking about waters.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, so it would make a noticeable difference, but as I say, I've just for black and white, I've applied 100%, so you can reduce that down any way you want.
Well, just this is not a question about the particularities of the figures you're giving us. We have to have this document in front of DIA on Friday, on the 31st, on 2 days' time. Is this material going to be what we are going to be sending them? And if it is, how might we amend it between now and then? Bearing in mind that there are things in here that don't sustain our case particularly well. or don't sustain our current decision particularly well. So is this what we will tell DIA?
So this is the next reiteration based on what we talked about last week and the direction you gave me last week to fund water's depreciation and to move that water metering project. This is the result of that council direction. Whatever direction you give me today, we will work with Morrison Lowe, fine tune the numbers. There's a lot of assumptions in this. And so we will do what we can over the next 2 days. Bear in mind, it's just a draft. This is our first initial draft that we're sending on Thursday, and we will still continue to fine tune our numbers over the next month before we send the official final water services delivery plan on the 3rd of September.
I mean, as far as direction goes, and being as realistic as possible, what we're looking at for the next annual plan to go from what our current rate take is, if we add in $7 million, there's going to be a 25% rate increase for next year, with another big one the following year. There's a lot of stuff that council has to do between now and the agreeing on that annual plan to cut costs elsewhere to find those, because I don't think we're going to have choices. There will be very few choices around the $7 million of depreciation going back in. So it's really looking at what are the other things. Now, we're not going to decide that today. I think, you know, what we have to show DIA is around revenue sufficiency, is that we've got to put the revenue up to meet their requirements around that and make sure that we are resourcing the activity as, you know, to be financially viable.
So I just wanted to respond to that. So we will need to do an LTP amendment because the current LTP has waters going out after 2 years. So we'll have to go through an amendment process next year. I think for the purposes of the water services delivery plan, we need to show revenue sufficiency. It'll be for the next council then to decide through that LTP amendment process whether it wants to try and offset some of those increases in water charges by cutting other services.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we've got to show a 25% rate increase in this plan and rely on it being cut over that LTP process.
Just one other supplementary question, if I may. If we look at page 3, we see showing in 2008 a rates rise of 25.61%. But if we go to page 7, where the rates increases affordability benchmark is identified, the statement made alongside that, I took that to be an affordability estimate, but what the text on the left-hand side says, in order to fund Three Waters depreciation from 2028, the required rates increase is now 42.55%, was 25.61 on 22 July. So again, what's DIA going to be told on the 31st of July? That our rates are going up by 25 or 42%?
So for next year, the amount taken out was $7 million. So if we put that back in, that increases the revenue by that $7 million. The next year, I think it was 9 million. So we need to add in a couple of million increase. So it won't be 42. It'll be something that's more like 30-ish, I would think. I'd estimate, and I don't think Amanda will have that number with her at the moment. But essentially, once we bring it in, we've got that base amount which carries on through. There's another 2 million that does have to be added to depreciation for that following year. So the impact of rates, there'll be another 4% or 5%.
Yeah. So the graph on page 5 is what it looked like last week. I just wanted to remind everyone where we ended last week was the 25%. I've added page 3. So on page 5 shows the 2 adjustments that I've made based on council's direction on the 22nd of July. I have added funding waters depreciation from 28 onwards, and I've pulled forward the water metering project. And then that gives the graphs on page 7.
Okay. So.
So, and
Right.
the mayor has mentioned, I haven't included funding waters depreciation in 26 and 27, but if we were to smooth it, bring that back in earlier, say in 2027, then the rates increase wouldn't be that significant. It wouldn't be the 40% in 28. Some of that would, like the bulk of it would be in 27. It would come earlier. It would be split differently. Yes. Yeah, you'd have your big increase would happen earlier if we started funding waters depreciation earlier than
Yes.
2028.
Yeah, no, I get.
But in
Really what I was
totality,
trying-
it'll be similar to that 45% increase until you get to that level of revenue that you need.
What I was trying to clarify was, the headline above the graph says rates increase affordability benchmark. And then gives the 42.55% figure. What I was trying to establish was, is that percentage figure an affordability benchmark or just a rate increase benchmark?
So that's an affordability benchmark. Our benchmark is set at the local government cost index plus 2%. So that's the black line there. So in 2028,
No, that's fine.
our limit is 4.8. To be affordable, our target our internal target is to be below 4.8%. And these forecasts are predicting a 42.55%. So it's breaching the rates affordability benchmark in that graph.
It'll look something more like, if we do introduce depreciation earlier, it'll be more like, 25% next year and 30% the year after. That's without taking anything else out, and that's what the process has to look at, is what do we cut out anywhere else and that's possible. Jeremy, you had your hand up.
I'm just trying to understand the metering a bit, because I don't think it was a full sort of council direction. I think there's only 2 or 3 of us that spoke to it. But from my position, I was more interested what that return on investment could offset other costs rather than adding that project in now. So I'm just trying to I think there was only Tim, the mayor and I that spoke about that. But
Okay, so in terms of pulling the water metering project forward into earlier years, that it would result in decreased CapEx the following years. Is that what you mean?
that's what I was trying, yeah, that's what I was trying to understand, rather than just making the investment of those years to put it about the affordability. What was it, the offsets, the loss was it, and say, I don't even have 1 year.
Yeah, it's quite hard to predict towards the later of those years. Hopefully we wouldn't need to do the capacity upgrades that are required. But then there's also, like, it's going to identify water leakage. So there would be extra projects that would need to be funded earlier in the plan to fix any water leakage identified. Did you want to say something further, Josh?
Yeah, sorry. In addition to what Amanda's just said, water metering is going to help in delaying some of the capacity upgrades that we need to do on the water network, but it's also going to allow the public to have some ability to control how much their bills are going to be in the same manner that we do with power. It's going to mean that if people, reduce their water consumption, their bill's not going to be as excessive as it would be otherwise. So it's a tool to reduce investment in capacity upgrades, but also a tool to enable people to have some control over how much their bills are.
I was just going to add to that, because we were having a conversation about this earlier, but I know we've only got 2 days, but I'm sure there's plenty of case studies out there on the internet that we could use to have a quick look at and go, as a rule of thumb, we would expect that by putting metering in, it tends to result in efficiency gains of X. We could quite confidently look that up and put something in here that didn't take very much work to be able to achieve.
I think there's definitely that efficiency gain, and we won't have to pump as much water, and we have to treat as much water equally. As Josh says, it gives people control over understanding what they are using, particularly if we're using smart meters where they can monitor on a daily basis what their water use has been. Those who don't use much water, and those particularly some of those individuals or couples that might be on superannuation and so on, they'll be able to manage their costs a bit better. we do have the other end of the spectrum where you've got large families and so on who may not be able to afford it either, but you know, that's we have to have some mechanisms that look at how they are looked after as much as possible, as long as the economic regulator doesn't say that we're not allowed to do that, because that is one of the risks in this, that you don't favour any sector or part of the community over another. So there's a number of challenges in there, but it does at least give some control to individuals.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I've only moved that project forward. I haven't taken into consideration any of those, but we could take another look at the capacity upgrade in the Lady Gear and consider reducing that project. But also there is the water leakage issue as well. We haven't factored in any necessary work that will be identified once the meters are in place. There'll be some work around that in the middle of this 10 years as well. Just to highlight on that slide as well, by funding water's depreciation, the balanced budget looks nice and healthy and sustainable. You'll see it's well above the 100% line there, and that extra funding appropriately goes towards any capital work. So that reduces the debt requirement. And in terms of the debt, it's a bit smoother. So it was getting quite close last week in 2034, close to the debt limit of 280%, but because we've increased the revenue base, it's a bit lower. And also by bringing that $8 million project out of 2034 and into 28 and 29, it's kind of smoothed that line as well. So that's that page. On to the next page, just looking a bit longer term. I thought this graph was quite useful, like a key of we've looked at increasing our revenue to the appropriate level. And then the other aspects that you can consider to have financially sustainable forecasts is the level of expenditure. So in terms of capital expenditure, this is the current forecast, long-term plan, with the waters as the orange. Blue is the bottom blue line is our roading and footpaths. So just looking across the 10 years, roads is pretty flat, and the three waters chunks up with our necessary capital projects in line with legislative requirements. And there is not too much other capital expenditure in there. So yeah, just to emphasise that there's not much capacity for anything else in council. Longer term, so on the next slide, this is...
Ask a question on that, but well, two, in fact, I presume that big lumpy bit on the right-hand side relates to the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant upgrade, along with any likely reticulated wastewater or blackwater networks or systems around the district. But the other thing that I did notice on that page, the statement we make, is, as discussed previously, council has applied a 15 mil PA cap on Three Waters projects in the first 7 years of the LTP. This is highly unlikely to be accepted by the DIA. Now, accepting that you are correct in that assumption, what do we think they would accept by way of an annual figure? Do we double it? Where are we at there, please?
Or just to extend that question, if we say these are the projects that we're planning overall, you know, what ones have to be done first? Because it's not necessarily that we do that 15 million and we add the next year's onto that. It might be some other ones that get brought forward. So will they give us that qualitative feedback would be the question on that. So thanks, Amanda.
Not sure what level of detail they'll go to, probably not the project level, but we've been working with Morrison Lowe at that level, at the project level. So there's been a lot of conversations over the last week, and Josh can talk about this further and after this. But yeah, so the 15 mil, you will remember in 2024, we had officers, the Waters Department officers recommended almost twice that every single year. We only applied the 15 mil because of our debt cap, because we didn't have the funding to meet the level that officers recommended. So the reason we say it's highly unlikely to be accepted by DIA is because of that reason, what officers recommended, and also the DIA confirmed that last week. And in our conversations with Morrison Lowe, like obviously they've seen other councils, they've worked with the Southern Water Group and things like that. So we'll keep fine tuning the plan that we submit on Thursday, and it is only a draft. We'll get some initial feedback after Thursday's draft plan is submitted, and hopefully we can have more acceptable forecasts before we submit our final plan on the 3rd of September.
So
Yeah,
I don't
the
think we
direction.
can give a figure at this stage, but I think, yeah, we know DIA has signalled that they've got questions around this. This is part of the assessment that will take place. So there'll be a investment sufficiency assessment. And we know that in trying to live under that 15 million, we prioritised compliance, so meeting the new standards. I think some of their concerns, and this was hinted at by the DIA, we've got a high water loss. So have we got sufficient being put into renewals and dealing with those issues with that ageing network that we've got, around the district is probably where they're going to question us. And we'll need to find answers for that.
Okay, but look, acknowledging that it's a draft, acknowledging that we can refine, amend, revoke particular figures, but accepting that our own officers have publicly said, hey, 15 mil ain't enough, we recommend a minimum of double that. And given that this is apparently a clear and negative focus of DIA, are we not obliged, when we make, say, a submission to them on the 31st of July, are we not obliged to put in an alternative figure? And if you accept that that's the case, what do you think that figure should be?
I think ultimately we're restricted by the fact that they want financially sustainable forecasts. And we have a debt cap of 280%. We're already looking to increase our rates revenue significantly to stay within that over the 10 years. We do not have financial capacity to go further than that. If it had shifted to a CCO, they would have had 500% of total revenue debt capacity. So that's why it was expected if it moved to a separate CCO, they would have picked up these forecasts and had a complete rejig and increased their CapEx program from 1 July 27 because they had the financial capacity to do so. We're trying to tick off the financially sustainable angle that will be accepted by DIA. So it's getting the right balance between doing what we must do in terms of capital projects and what is financially sustainable and affordable for our community.
So my question is, will they give us the qualitative feedback around what needs to be done rather than just here's a number? Now there is a metric where, according to our asset base and quality and so forth, there is a number that comes out of that, a percentage, but equally of everything we're proposing, what in there is a priority or needs to be done and when. So, that's the impact really of Te Mata Arawai and regional councils and the impact they have. So what's DIA's thought on that? And I'm just looking towards Josh just to see whether he's got any idea of, what that feasibility is.
Mr. Hope's been dealing with DIA far more thoroughly than what I have on this particular process. I would think though the DIA aren't going to look at it from this is the level of expenditure that we would think you need to make in terms of a cap. I think they'd be looking at it based on the evidence that we have and the condition of our network to ensure that we're sustaining the service levels that are required. So far, all of the condition of the network that we do have, although there are significant gaps in that, particularly our wastewater network is showing that it's rather poor. So they would be indicating that we need to have additional investment in that space. We don't have a lot of information on the condition of our water network, which is problematic because some of that network is now 140 years old. So that's something that we need to work with over the next few years so that we can refine our further investment program from that.
Hopefully 140 years and going strong. But
Look, will we then say on the 31st of July, we acknowledge that you don't believe that a $15 million capex for the first 7 years of the LTP on water capital project is sufficient. We do not at this stage have an alternative figure. We either will present one to you as soon as possible or invite you to put to us an alternative that you deem to be necessary. Is that what we might be saying?
No. Well, we're going to present this and get their feedback. Sorry, that's all we can do, because both you've had a robust discussion about it. It's not only the debt limit, it's the capacity to deliver. We'd have to scale up the organisation, particularly in the project delivery space, to move beyond the 15 million to, 20 or a higher amount, especially in the first couple of years. So we are, we will say, this is our best estimate at the moment. We're prioritising compliance issues first. We're then going to move into water loss issues because you've highlighted those. What is your feedback on this? And I appreciate them as questions, but DIA hasn't done this type of exercise. They've either considered a fully formed delivery plan. That's all they've assessed at the moment. And they are, it's a bit like the audits that we get with the LTP. They're looking at these things, providing feedback, and then sending out guidance saying, we will want more information on this compared to the template that we sent out originally. So that's some feedback we've had from Morrison Lowe saying, oh, actually, we need a bit more on this because they're already asking for this kind of things. So we will put in the best plan we can, but it is going to have flaws, and we will get the feedback and then work on the feedback to address that before we submit the final plan. So we can't really give any more detail than that at the moment.
So one of in the Martin Jenkins report that Simon kindly shared with us, they talk about, as part of the overall sustainability, the resource sufficiency. Have we got the staff and systems to deal with whatever we need to deal with? Obviously, we're a bit short on some of that. So as part of the draft, are we going to be having, this is our current staffing, and this is what we intend to be doing?
Right, we'll talk about, in our existing resources, we believe we can consistently deliver this level of expenditure effectively. And if they come back and say you need to increase it, then we will need to say, and that will mean that there will need to be an increase in resourcing. But that again, as you considered the report from the water team, 5 years ago, it takes a while to build up the system and processes to be able to deliver, the next leap in size of project and annual spend. And that we haven't had time to contemplate that because, again, the preferred option was the wider model that was going to have that kind of inbuilt extra resourcing and the additional capacity. So this is the kind of thing that we're talking, we need to think about over the next few weeks how we will respond and come up with a compliant plan.
Thank you.
Okay, if we move to page 9, this is really like the initial 10 years are well scoped out by project, and then the later years are not as well defined. But you can see the first peak in 22 to 34 relates to the renewal relocation of the wastewater pumping station and the capacity upgrades that we've spoken about. So you were right, Councillor Hopkins, that's that peak for that in those years. There is another one in 39 to 41 relating to the compliance upgrades that are necessary at the Oamaru wastewater treatment facility. And this is just not inflation adjusted. So obviously with inflation, these costs will rise probably quite significantly. But you can see across this 30 years, this is currently what council's capital projects look like, with the big chunky waters ones. Roading stays pretty flat, just maintaining our current levels of service throughout the next 30 years. So that is our current forecast in our infrastructure strategy, which the documents underlying our approved long-term plan forecasts. And then this is the longer term debt forecast. So you asked me last week to look beyond that year 10. You could see the increasing trend, and it looked like it was going to breach in the 2035 financial year. So it doesn't now, because we have made that decision to increase our revenue in 2028 by funding water's depreciation from 2028. So that's why when we don't breach in 2035 anymore, and also from pulling that $8 million water metering project forward into 28, 29. So that gives us another few years until 2038 where we come very, very close to the line. So in 2038, that is where we would need to have another 30% rates rise to increase the revenue base to stay within the cap beyond 2038. It stays pretty flat there. In reality, it won't. There will be other significant capital projects that will be identified in the next few years as we start to build a more realistic longer term picture. But yeah, that's what it's looking like long term right now.
Amanda, all of that affordability benchmark and revenue is based off the updated rates figures that you've got on page 7, which have that chunky hit in 28. So it's kind of your reset. Gets things going for a long time. Then you had another reset.
Yes, so the reset in 2028 helps. Like last week's figures were looking like 2034 was really close, that it was going to breach from 25 beyond. So that reset in 28 has brought us another 4 years there from 35 to 38. But then when we have the T.Y. Duncan wastewater treatment facility, that big spike in CapEx, in 2039 to 41, we're going to have to increase the rates base to do that, because to stay within our
But that's
debt
when
cap.
that's when you're starting to get out far enough that understanding the benefits and the efficiencies of water metering and stuff may have impacts on some of those other big infrastructure investments in that period of time. I mean, you're starting to get a bit more into the crystal ball country when you get out to there.
Potentially, but who knows what water metering is going to discover. So there's also extra costs that could be. Yeah, it's very difficult to predict out 30 years of infrastructure. There's all these assets we can't see underground. So if we move to page 10, so we've looked at, based on these forecasts, with water's depreciation funded from 2028 and that adjustment to the CapEx water metering project. These are the council-wide results and also the Three Waters Department, which is what the DIA will be looking at. So yeah, the table at the bottom is the Three Waters Department on its own. Ideally, revenue as a percentage of regulated asset base should be around 6 or 7%. Another assumption that I've made, I've just used total fixed assets. I do not have the regulated asset base. That hasn't been defined in legislation yet. It could be the fixed assets, like our depreciated replacement cost value. It could be revalued. It could be any sort of basis that the DIA comes up with to calculate the regulated asset base. We don't know that yet. So just my best guess at the moment is, well, the only figure that I can draw from at the moment is our fixed assets value that we report in our annual report. Depreciation, 2% of asset base is looking pretty on track. Operating expenses, ideally 2% of asset base. That's obviously an area we need to look at because it's over that threshold. And finance costs, we are below, but you can see in 2034, the 19% is getting close to 20% of revenue. So that's just how it's sitting in terms of these finances right now. That will be an area that we expect that they'll look at when they receive this plan on Thursday, and we'll get some feedback on, and we can continue to fine tune the numbers before we ultimately deliver our plan on the 3rd of September. So we will keep working behind the scenes. We can take any advice from today's meeting to build into this. We're still working with Morrison Lowe on a daily basis to fine tune the numbers. Yeah, and Josh is going to talk a little bit more about our capital projects.
Any questions before I start?
Well, I've only had a quick look down the page, but there's already one project that I'm familiar with that has got a substantial amount of money allocated to it, and yet we know that Te Mana Atawai's ever-changing footprint on what is required means that we may actually only spend 10 to 12% of what's budgeted. So I would suggest that one of the things that we need to support staff on is revisiting some of these projects, knowing that Te Mana Atawai have lowered the requirements in certain areas.
Which one are you looking at, Jim?
Well, I'm being oblique, but don't want to put staff on. I don't think we need to dive into that level of
So-
detail.
But perhaps I'll start on that note, with respect to, changing standards from Taumata Arawai, and some of the assumptions that are built into the plan at the moment. So the LTP listing that you've got here, was developed by the water team back in 2023 when we were undertaking a long-term plan process. Just before that, the drinking water quality assurance rules changed in November, December of 2022. The full effect of that wasn't yet known when this LTP was being developed, and there were several suppliers that required compliance upgrades that aren't actually detailed in here. I presented some information on that at PAR last month, and I mistakenly indicated that all of that was captured here, but on further review, there's 4 suppliers there that we don't actually currently have funding in that require funding for compliance upgrades. Taumata Arawai are also currently reviewing the acceptable solutions process at the moment. Quick back of the envelope calculation that I've done for some of those suppliers would indicate that there still isn't enough money here, even if they relax some of the rules around acceptable solutions. And that's notwithstanding whether or not those particular water supplies are suitable for treatment at the site of people's homes rather than centrally treated. Taumata Arawai has also recently released their roadmap to compliance. So they've indicated over the next 18 months, 2 years, all suppliers must be compliant by the end of 26-27. After that, they're going to be taking a focus on water security and of supply. So they're going to be looking at the number of instances where people have had to have boil water notices. They've had to have restrictions placed upon their supply, and they've had to have conserved water notices come through, which are all regular things that we currently undertake because our water sources are not secure sources in a lot of situations. We know full well that freshers occur and water events occur, and we allow for water supplies to be turned off because they're restricted supplies, and then we turn them back on once the water is clear enough to drink again. Or we tell people just to boil the water during that time when there's a weather event that's come through. The indications from Taumata Arawai at the moment, that won't be allowed moving forward. So that also isn't currently mapped through the long-term plan. It's again another increase in capital cost, not a decrease. We've spoken a number of times about capacity upgrades in the water supply, and the increase in cost that's going to come from that may be able to be reduced through water metering. If you look at the 10 years of the program there, Project 4547 actually doesn't have any capacity upgrades built in the later years. There's some funding there for the first few years before water metering even would have taken effect. All of those capacity upgrades were cut off when we reduced the project, the capital works list from the 400 odd million down to 200 odd million. So a lot of the things that we're talking about that might be levers to pull in terms of reducing expenditure on capital works, they've already been pulled. Right now, this is the best situation we probably have, and it's probably not realistic because the cost does need to go up. But I don't mean to be too negative. I'm just trying to say there is more work that we can do to refine this, but there is also more expenditure that's going to come on. There's a reality here of what's being expected from Taumata Arawai and the economic regulator that we have to come to grips with. And unfortunately, there's going to be a cost to that. Moving back to the graph that Amanda put up previously, where you saw 2 big jumps. That second jump is the upgrades at Tiwa Duncan, our wastewater treatment plant for Oamaru, where we do a significant rebuild of the site to be able to meet what are currently the draft discharge standards that Taumata Orowa has brought out. That's just Oamaru. There's a number of other suppliers that are also going to need investment to be able to meet the discharge standards that are coming through that aren't currently mapped. So in the future 30 years, there's further funding for that. The areas that are likely to come through from savings from Taumata Orowa, we have the acceptable solutions, which might bring it down from $10,000 a property to about $4,000 a property in terms of a treatment unit at point of supply. They are currently, the draft discharge standards for wastewater are still out. They do look very favourable, although they are still a significant increase in compliance requirements from now. We have very, very favourable terms in terms of discharge requirements at the moment, and all of our wastewater treatment plants are outdated in terms of technology, by decades. That's going to have to shift. The other thing that's going to be quite good is the national engineering design standards that are being worked on and brought out at the moment, where we are looking at standardisation of design across the country in terms of water networks, pump stations, treatment plants, so on and so forth. That's going to have a lot of efficiency in terms of cost to design, cost to procure, but also in terms of speeding up time to delivery, because you're going to be able to have some options that are off the shelf rather than having to go through and rework it from scratch. So that should be able to improve our CapEx delivery rate, which will be helpful. But again, that's probably a few years away at this point.
So Josh, when you talk about the current standards for wastewater discharge, or the draft ones.
Yep.
Is that to land or to water?
Yep. So the draft standards that
Thank you.
have come out have several options. So they're allowing discharge to waterways, they're allowing discharge to creeks, and the standards that have to be met are dependent upon where the discharge is going to. So if it's to land, there's a lesser standard, there's a lesser standard in terms of primary treatment. If it's to a waterway, it's a higher standard. So it enables council to kind of tailor its investment to suit where the discharge is going to be going to, and we can kind of do that cost comparative between buying land for discharge to land versus additional treatment for discharge to waterways.
Because one of the options, if you're actually treating it well enough, can it then be used for irrigation and so on? So rather than actually discharge to waste, actually utilising it in a better way.
Yeah, and certainly an option. The water systems that I used to run back in Australia, we use recycled water on a lot of our sports fields, a lot of farmland, so on and so forth. It is a significantly higher standard than what we currently treat to. So either way, there's going to be the uplift in terms of treatment, but there are options for reuse.
Yeah, we definitely need to take the solids out.
Yes, for sure. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
So I
Thank you.
yeah, I suppose I didn't mean to be too panicky. But I have heard a lot of conversation around the room about how we can potentially reduce the CapEx program to try to reduce the impact on rates and reduce the burden on debt. From what's coming in front of us, I don't see that we can reduce the CapEx program. I do believe it needs to go up. I don't believe it can come down. And that's just the reality of the situation. But happy to answer any questions.
Any other questions? Tim?
Thank you. I've just got some kind of comments overall, if that's okay, or so earlier in the session there was reference made to the water service organisation being able to borrow up to 500%, but the projections that we saw from Stuart Morrison Lowe indicated that regardless of being in-house or the joint scenario, under both scenarios, there was only going to be a similar amount of debt called on. So I'm just wondering why is that? I'm just trying to understand why there's that difference coming through for us here, and kind of coupled with that, again, and I raised this last week about, what page is that? Page 9 with the debt affordability benchmark. And you know, to Josh's point, it probably needs to be finessed further, but I'm still trying to understand why we're not seeing a drop off in debt over time for the all of council, when the Morrison Low graph wasn't 2034, it was 2038, showed a drop off in a way over that 30-year projection. So what's happened? Like what's the fundamental difference there? They're kind of my two overarching questions. But I think, you know, looking at what we've had in front of us today, yeah, it would be helpful to perhaps have a look at like the cumulative debt position over time, graphed against like as an additional y-axis, as I mentioned to you in an email separately, Amanda. But I'm just trying to find something here. I'm missing. Yeah, I think what kind of have we given any consideration towards the FFO requirements that would be placed on a WSO, and if we haven't, because I know like the surpluses we're generating would probably be I don't know, there might be 3 or 4% of the total borrowing, something like that, with what we've got here today. But if we were to adopt the FFO approach that would be expected of the water services organisation, you know, the surplus generated would be significantly greater, and therefore the forecast debt over time should be reduced, should it not? So I think that's a lever we need to be realistic about having to pull at some stage. It might not be upfront because we're going to feel such a hit at the initial stage, but maybe in 5 years' time, we need to indicate that that's the next step that needs to be taken, and would be taken anyway if water was somewhere else. I'm also keen to understand the OPEX at 6%. I'm trying to understand, is that because we haven't got the charges high enough, or like why are they at 6% and not near around the 2? Like, are we measuring something differently, or because we would have seen a higher level of projected household savings if that 6% is a real distinguishable difference between the joint entity and the in-house. So there's something doesn't seem quite right there when we're only spending like 5 or 6 mil on contractors, and it's sitting at 21, I think. Also, just noting, it's great to see the metering brought forward, but we have to also project what the benefits should be brought about as a result of doing that, to Simon's point earlier. So while the overall spend might need to increase on the capital works program, there might be some like right sizing and shifting of timing that is enabled by efficiency initiatives that we're able to adopt.
Can Amanda respond to some of those?
Yeah,
She's
sure.
probably running out of room.
Yeah, sure.
In her list.
Okay, so the debt levels that are called upon, so Morrison Low has done their forecasting based on this CapEx listing. So they've just applied the 15 mil each year. So that's why they had a lot of capacity in their 500% debt threshold, because they were keeping the CapEx at this 15 mil level. But we expected, in reality, when it shifted to a CCO on 1 July 27, that new entity would take a good hard look at this project listing and increase it, and it would have that headroom to do so. but Morrison Low had not changed the CapEx forecasts. They'd just used the same as ours. In terms, I'm lost.
So it still doesn't answer the question in that there's in their modelling, there's a downward trend on debt, whereas ours, oh, sorry.
So Morrison Low increased the revenue. So it's not the debt that goes down, it's the debt over revenue. It's the threshold. So they increased the revenue base so significantly that the threshold reduced, the debt over revenue. So we have done that to the extent necessary to stay within the cap. I've done that, I've factored that in 2028. And then I'm suggesting we do the same again before that huge CapEx peak in 2038. So I've done it to the bare minimum to stay within the 280% cap, but obviously they had a bit more headroom. They've done it a bit more extensively than I have. And that kind of comes to your FFO question as well, where they've applied that threshold. I have just done the bare minimum, just increased revenue as much as needed to stay within that cap. So I'm just keeping it as tight as possible. The 280% debt cap I'm talking about. Yeah, so I haven't done any work around the FFO. But Morrison Low is still doing that on the side as part of the Water Services Delivery Plan. That's all worked into the forecast that they've done. They've increased revenue a lot more than I have.
So, yeah, so what's going to go in the form of a draft? Because I know by not adopting an aggressive FFO approach, the rate pressure in the short term is going to be less, but the pressure in terms of overall debt position in the long term is going to be greater if we don't adopt a similar approach.
Guess we'll meet somewhere in the middle, or we will see what comes back from the feedback of what we submit on the 31st. That'll be something that we can talk about in future workshops and reach the right level that in between financial sustainability and affordability is just getting that sweet spot. So we'll take advice from the DIA and see where we land over the course of the next few workshops.
I mean, that's the benefit of a draft going to them, is so that they can say, okay, where are we falling short? What are the things we need to do? But we have to be realistic. They are going to measure this as being an in-house option for 10 years because that's the decision we've made. And it's not, yeah, that's the standard they're going to hold us to.
6% OPEX is an area we have to look at. Obviously, Morrison Low's costings were originally built around us joining Southern Waters. So I have applied different costings. We also have overheads in council. So Water Department is covering other departments' overheads and things. We have a lot of community aspects, departments internally that Waters pay their share towards. So when it's ring fenced, that'll be split differently. So that it potentially there is some overheads in there that could be moved out when it's a ring fence business unit. So yeah, overheads, I've just black and white based it on historic because it's the best information I've got at the time, but we do need to do a bit more work around that. And metering benefits, I think we've talked about. Obviously, we'll try and look at any capacity projects that happen after the water metering occurs earlier in the plan now, so we can reduce that. But I do also want to emphasise there is, like, if water metering does highlight leakage, breakage, extra work that hasn't been built in as well. So there could be some overs and unders. There's more work to be done. Did you have anything to add, Josh?
Yeah, oh, well, just to add to that, I think, as you said, that are we measuring the same basis? And I don't think we are. This was really just almost a comment that Marlon made last week. I don't think there's actually he didn't provide any detail to it. It was interesting that when Martin Jenkins looked at our numbers for the South Canterbury work, they actually thought our operating costs look light compared to some of the national averages. So we're sort of getting two very different messages. So I think we're not quite measuring the same things at the moment. And as Amanda said, it's how you're treating overheads, how you're feeding the financing. Is it just your contractor cost? How are you treating, staff costs? Ours appears all as an overhead rather than as a dedicated, sort of water unit sitting there with, here's the employment cost, here's the accommodation cost, that kind of thing. So I think we'll sort that out and make sure that we're talking on the same basis.
Sorry, just to clarify that comment from Ms. Nichols. Capacity upgrades from water metering, we don't currently have anything in terms of capacity upgrades noted within the 10-year plan. Those were all removed. So even if we do water metering now, that's not going to reduce the capital works program as currently planned. It will for future years where we're able to reduce expenditure on capacity upgrades, but that's likely to be offset by a lot of the water security issues that are going to come through. The only funding that's in there at the moment for the Oamaru Water Strategy, which was the capacity work that we were doing, was around the changes to the Lower Waitaki Irrigation Company's consent and how we're sourcing raw water from them before treatment. So that's a piece of work that's happening in the next few years, and that's why there's a significant sum of money in the first 3 years, but that's not actually related to capacity. That's related to security of supply for raw water.
I think it would be good to articulate exactly what the benefits are, even if we can't quantify the value. It is that ability for properties to regulate their use of water. Anecdotally, when these things come in, it's usually 20 to 25% saving in water use. So there's a bit of saving in treatment, a bit of saving in pumping and on pumping and so forth. Equally, there should be a similar amount less going to wastewater. That'll be reduced because we're not using as much. So, what's the benefit of that? Is that going to actually save some money at that end, or is it just that it's going to make it a bit easier on our systems overall? And I don't expect that the savings will necessarily pay for the program itself, but I think that just that level of control that people will have will make it a difference to some of the most vulnerable people potentially. Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just be a wee bit cryptic in what I describe here because I don't think it should be aired in a public forum, but we do have water users who need to address how they use water because there are implications downstream. And we've been possibly soft shoeing it. What I'm seeing here today is we need to have some hard discussions with water users as well, because effectively, if we don't, the general ratepayer is subsidising private business.
Josh.
Sorry, I know we're out of time. Yes, so there's a number of programs that we're planning on doing over the next 10-year period that are going to assist somewhat, particularly in the wastewater space. We do at the moment have some replacements of the Orwell Street pumping station, as well as the duplication of the rising main that goes out to Tiwai in the latter years of the first 10 years. If we're able to resolve some of the issues in terms of inflow and infiltration, we might be able to delay those a couple of years. That's not to say that the work isn't necessarily still going to have to happen. In particular, Orwell Street, we still have a situation where it is on the coastline. The coastline is eroding. We're going to have to deal with something in terms of ensuring that that asset is protected into the future. And in terms of the duplication of the rising main, that may be able to be pushed out. At some stage, we are going to... Yes, yep. At some stage, we are going to have to rebuild the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant, and there's a number of factors that come into what the size of that plant has to be, including inflow and infiltration, including trade waste elements, a few other factors that are going to actually determine how much we need to invest in that project. We'll still be working on those things, but if we resolve a situation such as inflow and infiltration, that might then mean that we have to upgrade our stormwater systems. to be able to cope with additional stormwater in the streets, because at the moment, all of that's making its way into the wastewater network. So there's trade-offs that we have to make in terms of the changes that we need to make in user behaviour. That all is going to take some time to work through and isn't something that we can necessarily provide certainty on in terms of savings now. We really need to spend some time and effort working on these programs to make some improvements so that we can actually give you some quantified savings. Because until that's done, we're throwing darts at a dartboard in terms of guesses about how much we might be able to save on the capital program.
Thanks, Josh. And I think it's just really important just to, I guess, review a wee bit about where we are at and how we've got here. There's a lot of our infrastructure is actually pretty good, and our water upgrades and so on, the focus that we've had on the last 15 years, 20 years has borne fruit, and I think it's been really good. In some areas, that's been at the expense of not getting reticulation renewals done and to the level that they should. So we have more leaks than we should, and some of that work isn't there. We definitely have issues around stormwater infiltration into wastewater, and the more we can separate that out, the better off we will be. But that'll come at a cost to property owners. We're doing the backflow valve. Backflow prevention valves on a lot of properties where there's a higher risk of that, and those things are good things, but they all cost money. Looking at some of the abatement notices we've got, there are emerging issues that we haven't necessarily been aware of, or we definitely haven't been aware of, that we are finding out as we go along. And so they are things that we have to deal with and acknowledge. There are new regulations coming in around water standards, but also things like regulations around dams. And who knew our water reservoir was actually classed as a dam because it holds back water, and it's it's one of the classified as a risk. Is that the terminology? High risk dam?
Yeah, classified as a flood-prone dam.
Yes.
Yep.
So if something happens, then, so those are all emerging things which we didn't know necessarily some time ago that they were problems. So they're all things that need to be dealt with. We've invested a lot. We've got a reasonable amount of external debt. A lot of it is due to water upgrades. So the investment has been there. We've got a lot more investment to make. We've decided to keep water in-house. We need to deliver the plan as best we can. This opportunity to put a draft plan in is a good opportunity to get feedback on that and find out where are we a bit short on, what do we need to be doing to make sure that we reach sufficiency and the resourcing and the finance, the revenue, all of those aspects that make sure that we're financially sustainable. So it is complex, and we've been working hard, and just again acknowledge the work that officers have done in a very short time to come up with all of this information. And thank you very much for all of that work. It's very much appreciated. Next Tuesday we will be having another several hours on this, starting at 1 p.m. So that'll be
1 p.m.
1.
Oh, 1 p.m.
It's been moved to 1. So that will be a longer opportunity to talk about water, because we don't talk about it enough. But in the meantime, officers are going to be doing a heck of a lot of work. So just thank you in advance of that. So Tim, I'll just go to you.
Sorry, just one quick question regarding what's going on the 31st around our, like I think we've canvassed the revenue sufficiency and investment sufficiency kind of things today, but around the network performance and compliance side of things, will we be providing an indication around that as well? So if we are doing that, in light of the fact a number of our outputs at the moment are non-compliant for various reasons, are we going to be kind of putting some risk assessment lens across that, with also what we're currently working towards in terms of mitigating the issues?
Yeah, we vote for you to say something, Paul.
Yeah. Look, that's one of the sections in the template that have to be completed. So it is a discussion. We had quite a discussion with Morrison Lowe sort of providing narrative. So, you know, what they're saying, it's like, yeah, it's one thing to collect the information, but almost the more important thing is telling the story around it, to being, you know, recognizing where you have issues, and you know, these are quite public. They're going, you know, that's one of the first things they requested. It needs to be disclosed in the delivery plan, and then it's recognizing those things, and then telling the story about, well, what are your plans to address those, and then tying that into the capital plan and into the program. So it needs to be, here's a section, but here's the overall story, and that's really, you know, what they've been certainly working on the last couple of days, and working on tomorrow, because they saw that as the most important part, to be able to tell that story in the plan, so that DIA isn't just looking at the individual pieces, that they can put it in context, and then understand the pieces, and then come back with some decent questions, rather than, if you don't do that, it's like, oh, you've got this, you haven't addressed it, you haven't talked about it, what are you going to do in that space? So I think, you know, they're really working on getting something that's complete, so that we can get as good a feedback as possible, because, you know, the objective is to get a compliant plan by the 30th of September. And so the more, you know, the better feedback we can get at this time round, the really does increase the likelihood of us getting a compliant plan through in the first attempt, which is, you know, what we're all aiming for. So, you know, the bill, yeah, they've been really, and their discussions with us, they've really focused on sort of, well, what's the filling in the gaps in between sort of the bits of data that we've provided.
All right, well, thanks very much, as I said before, and we look forward to next week. So, thanks to the members of the public who have been in the chamber for your interest. For those aspiring candidates, you can withdraw up until Friday, but hopefully you don't. Yeah, we've got some challenges. We're going to deal with them as best we can. So thank you very much.